Okay, so this time around we're going to take a look at a casual blue-black control deck for Pauper format still. This one I have deemed as the blue-black FrankenBaby. So what I did is I took some of my favorite parts of both the mono blue control deck and the mono black control deck, and I kind of mixed them together, and this is what I came up with. This is a casual deck, so there is no sideboard here, but it runs pretty well, and it's fun to bring out and whenever you get the opportunity to do so. So let's take a look at this. Let's start with the creature base. I wanted to, of course, include the spell stutter sprites because it's a great counterspell. I am a big fan of fairies. I used to love the blue-black one. So in order to bump that up, you bring in the Cloud of Fairies as well. Cloud of Fairies also allows you to untap land, so you have the available mana to cast these instants, the counterspells, the Echoing Decays, whatever you need. You'll see all my spells in this deck are instant speed, so that's kind of a big benefit to having the fairies on tap land. Now, when we move to the black section, I wanted to bring in Ravenous Rats. There are quite a lot of great cards in the mono black control as far as creature base, but I like the rats. I wanted to mix in some discard to go with the counter packages. It's not a whole bunch of discard, but it's enough to get some disruption going on. In contrast to that, I brought in the Shinobi as well. He is one of the tougher creatures to deal with in the mono black matchup, so why not just add him to this deck as well. He causes you to discard 2 when he hits you, and the other, I guess his blue doppelganger would be the Ninja, the Deep Hours, which allows you to draw cards when he does damage. So the two of them work pretty well. I did add double of the blue ninja because card draw is more of a premium for this deck. They work pretty well because they allow you to return to your hand the rats, the sprites, or if you absolutely need to, you can return a fairy so that you can replay it, for double blue and untap a swamp, something like that. The last creature I threw in here were the Fume Spitters. I am a big believer in the fact that a lot of the creatures in this format are at least dealable with a -1/-1 counter on them. So I wanted to bring in 3 Fume Spitters. In the original version I had 3 Duress in here. I wanted to try and beef up the discard package, but decided that the creature base needed a bit of a boost. Your biggest hitter is going to be the Shinobi at 3, so to your damage you're going to be swinging with several 1 power, 1 toughness creatures. So bringing in the Fume Spitters gets you a little more creature kill. It gets you a turn 1 play if you manage to draw it. So another thing to note, we'll transition here, is because you are playing with the 1 attack power creatures, that you really need a lot of creature kill. You need to be on top of the control and keep that board clear so you can swing. Even if it's only 2 or 3 points per turn, you do want to be able to swing free and clear. So we'll bring in pretty much the best reason to be playing blue-black, and that is Agony Warp. It allows you to give one creature -3/-0 and the other -0/-3. That can both be targeted onto the same creature to kill it. And one of my other favorite ones is the Echoing Decay. It gives -2/-2, and it applies it to all creatures of the same name. It's a really nice thing to have because you get a lot of matches where they kind of swarm and they will have multiples. Mono White is one of the better examples. If they play a Squadron Hawk, they can search out the other 3 versions of that card from their deck. So an Echoing Decay will be able to kill that. It helps greatly if you run into some kind of Storm deck with Empty the Warrens as well. So finally, fill out my counter package. We have good old-fashioned counterspell. I did consider bringing in Rune Snag for this, but I liked the fact that counterspell kind of hits it and done. If the counterspell is successfully cast, then that spell, there's no option to pay to negate. They have to just have a counter to answer my counter. The next one is one of the other great blue-black Pauper cards, and that is Soul Manipulation. This allows you to counter. It's creature specific, but it allows you to return a creature as well. You have the option to do either or both of those things with this card. I like it in this deck because, as I said, the creatures you have are kind of at a premium, so if you lose one or two, especially one of the ninjas, since these ninjas are going to be kind of your bigger hitters, if they, get killed, you can bring them back with the soul manipulations. Now the draw package for this deck is really mostly based upon the accumulated knowledge. It scales up, so the more times you play this card, the more cards you will be able to draw. So you better, it's one of those options where you better hope to get those, because if you don't, your only other draws are through the Barren Moor. I did put in a Lonely Sandbar, so this could be cycled off if necessary. You can also cycle the fairies, but you have to just be smart about playing that. You do want to have a couple in play for a sprite. I want to say the average casting cost in Pauper is around 3, so if you have 3, then you can feel a little safer in cycling off a Cloud of Fairies. But yeah, I would say if you were going to make any changes to this deck, it would probably be along the lines of the draw engine for it. If you wanted to bring in something else instead of accumulated knowledge, like think twice for the same, it works good because it's instant speed as well. It has a flashback cost, but I am kind of partial to accumulated knowledge because it ramps up so significantly, but especially by the time you get to the 4th playing of it. Yeah, and it's another thing, if it's forced to discard, you can feel free to throw away the accumulated knowledge, and it'll just help you in the later games. So let's take a look at, I brought up a couple example games I had while testing this deck to show you guys. This is the first game here, pretty good start. I have accumulated knowledge for early on, I've got both colors of mana, and I have 2 counter spells. You're sitting pretty good. You can throw out the Evolving Wilds on the first turn and use it to thin deck right off the start. I'm always a big proponent, as anyone who's familiar with my videos knows, of getting as much land as possible out of my deck. So now you have the option. I could throw down the swamp and still be able to play accumulated knowledge, but if I do that, then I am not able to play the counter spell right off the bat. So the smarter move is you want to put your island out, then you have it open to play counter spell, and you still can use accumulated knowledge. You're going to want to wait till the end of your opponent's turn to do so, though. Whenever you're playing a counter deck, you want to just make sure that you're doing your best to wait till end of turn to cast all your instant spells, so that you have your opponent's made all his plays, you've reacted how you wanted to, and then you can play on from there. So I draw an Echoing Decay off the accumulated knowledge, which is great. I'm going to put a swamp into play so that I have the mana available, and now we'll come down Cloud of Fairies, and you see this is one of the benefits to that. It allows me to untap 2 lands after playing it, so I can play the 1/1 creature and I still have the mana untapped and open for counterspell, and because I got the swamp in play, I do have the option for Echoing Decay as well. So my opponent, he's playing Jace's Erasure. You see something like this off Brainstorm into Erasure on turn. I guess it's 3 now, but if he gets an Erasure coming down early, you know he's playing a mill deck. Usually this version, I've seen this casual before, it will come down to this being pretty much his main outlet for discard. So you're going to want to counter that right away. A lot of his deck is going to be built around draw spells to really get as many triggers off of the Erasure as possible. So I'm going to hold this second counter spell, where I just drew, you see, a sprite, so that if he does finally draw into a new Erasure, I have answers for it. Once that enchantment comes into play, there are no answers in this deck for that card, so you want to make sure you have not only the mana available to play the counters, but you just want to make sure it does not actually hit the table. So he's going to cast a whole bunch of draw spells, and like I said, you want to hold on to these counters to prevent that Erasure from coming down, so I'm more than happy to let him draw as many cards as he wants. Right now, drawing cards is not a threat to me. So I drew Ravenous Rats, and I usually like to hold some land in my hand to bluff, but if I play the rats, I want to have the mana open to still have double blue for counterspell. I want to have the mana open though I have a black untapped, so I can use Echoing Decay. It's really an important thing to know how to play your mana base. If you tapped out both blacks, you would be unable to use the Echoing Decay if necessary. If you tapped out, a blue and a black, you would not have the extra mana for counterspell unless you actually play that island. So it's just you want to be aware of these little things. My opponent's going to try and counter the rats. I did decide to not let this happen. I want the rats to come into play. Like I said, creatures are kind of at a premium because we do only 1 damage per. So you want to get that rat into play, and I made sure, I still have the counterspell available to take care of Erasure if it comes up later on. Sprite's another thing. If you have that option there, counterspell versus the spell stutter sprite, the card you want to play is the sprite. You want to make sure if you play the counterspell, you are now stuck with the sprite, which means if he plays anything over 2, you are unable to counter it. So you want to use this one because the counterspell does catch all. The sprite, if you left that as the card in hand, you would be stuck waiting around for a 2 cost. That's not such a bad thing, since I said I was waiting around for an Erasure, but it's just, again, something to be aware of for later games and when playing this deck. Then we draw another Rats. You see what he's discarding is mostly lands, but he's only played draw spells, no creatures. Not exactly a great deck, in my opinion, but like I said, I have seen it before, so I was aware that there were not a lot of opportunities to use things like this. Other versions may be different, but I was lucky enough to get this opponent who's playing pretty much just all draw spells. So he plays a couple of these Words of Wisdom, which allow me to draw, which is great because it gets me into the Shinobi. Like I said, if there were any kind of holdbacks with this deck, it was the fact that the draw is a little slower than I usually prefer for my personal playstyle. But his adding those draws to my hand allowed me to get into the Shinobi. So now I can attack with all these, and this is where I said the ninjas are great. You have the option I can bring the sprite back to my hand or the rats, and replay them and reuse their abilities. So you see, again, you want to pay attention to your mana options. I do want to leave mana open so that I have the counter spells available for Jace's Erasure. Again, I could have tapped this blue and left a black untapped and still be able to play the sprite, but he knows after seeing this what I have in hand, he knows I have the sprite, so he's gonna think he's gonna be aware of that and try and get me to cast the sprite on something other than the Erasure. So by leaving these two open, he still thinks, okay, he's left mana open for the sprite, but I have also left myself mana open for the counter spell. So he gets more draw off. He doesn't actually get, in this game, as a bit of a spoiler here, he does not actually get to a second Erasure, so it kind of ends up being solitaire at this point. But you see the rat here, the rat ninja, is one of the strongest creatures in this deck, just because it works really well to disrupt your opponent's hand, and it's your biggest hitter. He does play quite a few damage prevention spells at this point in time, and I'm not going to waste a counter spell on it. There's really no point. I know he's running a deck where his win condition is the Erasure, so as long as I have that under control, he can waste as many turns as he wants preventing damage. I guess he would, if I was in his shoes, I was probably using those to draw out the sprite, and it's something you can consider at this point, especially you just drew a new negate, which would counter that as well. I decided to simply just let it go and hold these counter spells for something more important. You see, drawing yet another counter spell. I have all this mana available. Like I said, just be aware of how you're going to cast spells, so you always have mana open for the double blue and counter spell. So I finally get through. The Shinobi's going to force my opponent to discard. We see that he did have a Moment's Peace and a counter spell in hand. I guess he was perhaps waiting for the sprite to calm down to use that counter spell. He did at one point earlier discard a forest. I'm not sure if that was the only forest he was running in this deck, but he was unable to cast the Moment's Peace because he did not have that green land. So it's going to come down to my turn. I'm going to be able to attack and swing in for the win. Anything he plays here, you would have been able to counter off with the numerous spells you had in hand. So let's take a look at this second game I wanted to show you. This is another pretty good hand. I don't have both colors of mana, but I do have an Evolving Wilds, so on turn 1 I will be able to put that into play and find that island that I need. We're also looking at an Accumulated Knowledge early, which is great because that relies on having other copies of it in your graveyard. You want to get that going as soon as possible. Drew into an island, that's great, but I still don't have a turn 1 play, so I'm going to still use the wilds to search out an island. Early games you want to be finding islands with your Evolving Wilds. It's really going to be the smarter play. The deck does need the black mana, but you are heavier blue, so you want to make sure you get those as fast as possible. So my opponent plays a Rats. He's in black-red, and oftentimes in casual that's going to mean some discard. You're going to run into stuff like Blatantings, so I'm pretty okay with this though, because I will use the Accumulated Knowledge and discard that, so that my next turn, or the next time I get the Accumulated Knowledge, I will be able to cast that and draw even more cards. So again, we run into a situation like last game. You have a couple options as far as playing land, but I'm going to put down the second island so I can play Counterspell. The Sprite can kill a 1-cost spell at this point in time, but the Counterspell will kill everything. One thing you have to be aware of as well with any deck running red, odds are, especially in casual, the red means they will be running stuff like Lightning Bolt or instant cast burn damage, and when you cast the Sprite, his ability will go on the stack, and in response to that going on the stack, they can Lightning Bolt the Sprite to reduce the number of fairies on the field. So just something to keep your mind on. Here we do, he does have the Blatantings, but I have the mana open so I can Counterspell. Now you see, if I had played the Swamp, I would have had the option to kill the Rat with the Warp and counter a 1-cost spell, but the Blatantings would have hit and I would have been forced to discard there. So now again, I don't want to use the Warp, it's kind of wasted on a 1-cost, or a 1-attack creature. I'll play the Evolving Wilds and I can use that to search out a swamp if I really need to. Using the Warp on a 1/1 creature is really just a waste. You want to hold that in your hand until something comes later on. You can take damage to the 1 damage every turn. I'm definitely a proponent of taking damage. When I first started playing Magic, I never wanted to take any damage, so I was blocking everything possible to prevent damage, and I really found throughout the years that you want to be able to take damage, and the more damage you take, the better you can be off later on. So my opponent gets a second Blatantings, and now I don't have an option to counter it, but I will just search out the land. I search out a swamp because I know I'm going to discard this swamp, whereas if I did not get hit by Blatantings, I might have picked something different. This allows me to just get rid of the swamp, and I'll get rid of the other land as well. This deck, you could do pretty well sitting at probably 4 mana the whole game, but I'm pretty okay with getting hit with this 3 mana base and discard these others that I had in hand. So my opponent gets a Delver down. It's actually a pretty cool idea with this deck, to be playing these colors to get the Blatantings and bring in Delvers. I may actually kind of take this idea and try my own version, mixing some of those cards together. So now we're at the end of my opponent's step, and I want to be able to play the Sprite here. Now it's not going to counter anything. The only reason I want to get that into play is so that on my next turn I can attack. Since he has no flyers, I'll be able to put the Ninja into play. You see here, he'll know now that I have a Sprite in hand, but I'm okay with that at this point in time. I really could use the card draw after that one Blatantings landed. So if we can get that into play, that's great. You see, I drew a second Sprite, so I'm better off down the line. If I get to that 4th mana, I will be able to play a Sprite, and if he kills it or counters it, then I have the option to play the second one that he is not aware of. So he has the option to seize Delver. The top card is apparently not an instant or sorcery. I'm guessing it was perhaps the Terramorphic, so he does not get a chance to flip that card yet. He attacks with both, gets me to 13. I don't know, personally I may have tried to chump block with the Rat just to stall off a draw, but he does not. I have both Soul Manipulations in hand and mana on the field. When I'm sitting in a situation like this, you want to attack with the ninja first so that you can draw the card. And if you get a land, you can make the land drop. Even if I have a land in hand, I still like to attack first with the ninja so I can see what I draw and then base my play off of that. So I do decide at this point, you see I draw a second Agony Warp, and I decide to kill the Delver. This is kind of an interesting thing. I probably should have waited till the next turn to see if the Delver flipped. If the Delver flipped, I could still kill it with the Agony Warp, and I would now be one card smarter as opposed, like, wait, let me reword that 1 second. If I waited till his turn, Delver would have gone onto the stack for him to reveal a card. Now, if it was a card that allowed the Delver to flip, I would now be knowledgeable as to a card in my opponent's hand. And the Delver's toughness is so small that it would still die to the Agony Warp. So probably the better play there, if anyone is in that situation, is to wait till your opponent's turn, use it during combat as a response to tacking or something like that. I'm guessing that he did not draw, he would have gotten the Terramorphic again because of his play there, but it's still just something you want to keep in mind. Now again, you have the option to use the Warp on the rat to kill it. He's going to clearly chump block. I assumed his only play here was to either chump block and get a 1 damage spell to kill it, or just chump block and hope he draws something. But if he had a 1 damage spell, I did have the sprites, I would have been able to pick off something like Lava Dart. I didn't really, again, don't want to waste the Agony Warps because you want to keep your creature kill to a minimum, using it only when necessary. You see now he draws into Lightning Bolt, which is what he was hoping, but whether or not he remembers I have the sprite, it doesn't matter because he has to make that play. So I can counter that off, and I will be able to swing with the ninja on my next turn. You notice another thing you always keep track of is your opponent is now at 1 card in hand, so he will probably have no answers at this point in time. So I'm going to swing through with both, have the opportunity to draw. Like I said, I hold on to lands until after combat with the ninja so that I can base my play off of that. Drew a Fume Spitter on that, I will play that. You also have the option to leave that black mana open so that you have it available for stuff like Soul Manipulation. I don't think at this point in time, let's open this 1 sec. Yeah, I did not have a creature in my graveyard. Ideally, you want to be able to cast Soul Manipulation when you actually have the creature, so you can use both the counterspell and the return of the creature. If it comes down to it, don't wait and let a powerful creature go through. You want to use it, but it's always ideal to get that off when you actually have a creature to return. Sorry. So I'm going to swing again. My opponent is complaining at this point that he only has 20 lands in this deck, and look how many he's drawn. You run into that a lot, but I drew into a Ravenous Rats, which I will play to see what this 1 card is that he's been holding on to. And it turns out that it was an island, so I guess he is a bit mana flooded. He did even play a couple Terramorphics in there, so it's just, I guess, bad luck on his part. He plays the rat, but I will use the Spell Stutter sprite to stop that. Oh, okay, sorry. In most places, I would have used the sprite. At this point, like I was said earlier, I like to hold on to lands, and since I have the island in hand, I'm just going to discard it. He concedes at this point in time. He could have kept playing. Chump block the ninja with the rat, or I could have killed it with the Fume Spitter. I probably wouldn't have, saving that Fume Spitter for later on, if it was more necessary. As I said, you look at this deck, your creature kill comes in the form of... Sorry, close that out of there. Your creature kill really comes in the form of the Agony Warps or the Echoing Decay. Your main defense against creatures is to keep them off the table. With Soul Manipulation, you got the sprites, you got the counter spells. If they do come into the table, you have your array. You have the 1 toughness kill, 2 toughness kill, and the 3 toughness kill. So there you go. That's what I'm declaring my Pauper blue-black FrankenBaby. Make sure you go to puremtgo.com. check out my article, which will feature a whole bunch of blue-black control decks this week.